Thank you very much for being on the programme. Congratulations on the new job. We'll get into the reasons for the appointment in a moment, but first, if you could just give us an update on what's happening with Sudan. France deciding to evacuate their citizens. Are we going to do the same?
Well, thank you, Sophie. And the situation in respect of Sudan is clearly a rapidly moving and complex situation. Our priority is to support British nationals. Now, the Minister of Defence is acting in support of the Foreign Office, but clearly you wouldn't expect me to comment for security reasons on the current situation in terms of movements on the ground.
Sure, I get that you don't want to get into the details of movement, but at the same time, the US has said that they're evacuating diplomats. France has come out to say they're going to evacuate nationals as well. Are we looking at evacuating citizens?
Well, as I said, we have got the Ministry of Defence is supporting the Foreign Office. You wouldn't expect me to get into what is going on at a ground level, but what I can say is that we are. First of all, what I would say is a very different situation to, for example, the situation that you saw in Afghanistan for a number of reasons. First of all, this situation has arisen very rapidly. And secondly, we just don't have the kind of scale of resources on the ground that were there in Afghanistan. But clearly, we need to make sure that we support our British nationals. At the moment, the advice to British nationals is to make sure they stay indoors, that they stay safe and that they get in contact with the Foreign Office.
OK. We'll continue, of course, talking to the government as it goes on to see if that advice changes or if there's any movement and more that you can tell us later. You're testing an emergency alarm today. What's the thinking behind it?
Well, the job of government is to keep people safe. It's the number one job of government. And what we are doing is we're testing an emergency alert. So at 3 o'clock this afternoon, there will be a siren-like sound for about 10 seconds on people's smartphones. It's about the same volume as if your phone was ringing. What I would say to people is, this is just a test. You don't need to do anything. It's rather like the fire alarm test. Is a bit irritating at the time, but in future, people could be grateful for it because in a real emergency, this could be the sound that saves your life.
Forgive me, it feels like there hasn't been a vast amount of advertising around this, right? At 3 o'clock, when people's phones start blaring out, people are going to panic, aren't they?
Well, I don't think that's the case. We tested this, for example, in the Reading area, and there were over 140,000 people involved, and there was very positive feedback. There wasn't any panic at all. I have announced, I think, on your programme a couple of weeks ago that this thing was coming. It's very similar to what happens in other countries, whether that's the United States, whether it's Japan or Canada. They regularly test these things as well. I think it's another tool in the toolkit. I think most British people in these situations keep calm and carry on. I'm sure they'll do the same thing again. OK, now, I don't want to spend too much time talking about migration, because, to be honest, it feels as if every Sunday we have another almost identical opinion piece by Suella Braverman saying she's going to take on the courts and she's going to get tough on small boats. But there are a couple of facts I think it would be useful to try and find out ahead of the illegal migration bill coming to the Commons this week. Is the Home Secretary going to be given powers to ignore European courts if they try to stop deportations to Rwanda? Well, I think you're talking about the so-called Section 39 provisions. The Home Secretary will be given a discretion, an ability to look at the circumstances of that order from the European Court of Human Rights, and will, for example, consider factors such as the timeliness of the imposition of the order. So, for example, if it is done at last minute, and also the transparency of it. Because underlying all of this, Sophie, is the same point. And by the way, I've been out campaigning a lot. I hear this so much from people. People want us to get control of our borders, stop this vile traffic and
honest,
stop the boats. And this is an important provision as part of that.
So much about the arguments for and against. I'm just trying to nail down exactly the facts, right? So there will be a discretion given to the Home Secretary to effectively ignore European court rulings.
Well, there will be a Section 39 discretion. Now, I'm not saying that will give the Home Secretary carte blanche to overall rulings. What I would say is that, first of all, we are engaging very closely with the European Court.
Some would say that's breaking international law.
We're making very good progress, but I think it's right that the Home Secretary should have a discretion. So, for example, we don't have this situation where, at the very last minute, an order is imposed. Those are the sort of factors that the Home Secretary will be able to consider.
Will there also be a move to open up more safe and legal routes? Because that's something that other people are really concerned about, that it's very difficult for people to actually legally claim asylum.
Yes, well, the first thing to say is that we've allowed over 500,000 people to come into this country.
No, I just want to get the facts.
So it's an important point of context.
I just want to get the facts.
It is an important point of context on this, which is that in this country we've been able to allow Ukrainians, Hong Kong nationals, Afghanistan nationals in. Now, of course, I want us to be able to be in a situation where we can create more routes for people to come into this country.
So are we going to be in that situation next week?
What comes first is making sure that we get control of our borders and we stop this vile trafficking of people across the English Channel, only profiting criminal gangs. Once we get control of that, stop the boats, then we will have more capacity to be able to extend our kindness and generosity as a nation, which I'm very proud of, even further.
That sounds like a no to me then. No move next week to open up more safe and legal routes to the UK. Let's move on to other issues, because, as I said, it feels like every week we're talking about this issue. Is Dominic Raab a bully?
Well, the Prime Minister asked Adam Tolley to conduct a detailed investigation. I think it was about 48 pages long. He set out the facts of what happened in a very clear way. There's nothing further I can add to that interpretation. What I can say, though, is that Dom promised that if there was an adverse finding against him, he would resign. I've worked with Dom on, over a number of years. Particularly, I remember the time when he took over from Boris when he was incapacitated. I know that Dom is a man of his word, and he resigned. And as the Prime Minister said, I think that was the right thing to have done.
He did. He made that promise on this programme that if the bullying complaint was upheld, he would resign. So if he hadn't made that commitment, do you think he would still be in a job?
Well, Sophie, that's a hypothetical situation. The Prime Minister asked Adam Tolley to conduct this investigation.
You raised it.
It was a very comprehensive piece of work. It dealt with each of the allegations against him and went into the facts of those. The situation as to whether the Prime Minister had to make a decision on that didn't arise because Dom had always promised if there was an adverse finding against him, he would resign. He's a man of his word and he's stuck by that.
Would you like to see him back in Cabinet?
Well, I think Dom has a huge amount that he has offered this country in the past. Clearly, decisions as to who is in the Cabinet or not are purely the preserve of the Prime Minister. Now,
Dominic Raab has blamed activist civil servants who are trying to block reforms. And in The Observer today, it says the government's considering allowing ministers greater powers to appoint their own civil servants. Do you think there is a case for that?
Well, we keep all of these things under review. I think it was actually an article by Francis Maud, who was a predecessor in the Cabinet Office. And I think it's important that we look at civil service appointments on an ongoing basis. But I'm pretty confident that at the moment, ministers are able to give clear instructions to civil servants and to get things done. And that has to continue. And I can say that certainly there won't be any dropping of my high standards from the civil servants that work for me. And the reason for that is that we're here to serve the British people and we must continue to do that.
Do you think that Raab is wrong then, Mr Raab is wrong then to talk about the civil servants in the way that he does? Because he is talking, right, about activist civil servants. He's effectively saying that they're out to get him.
Well, I didn't live Dom's experience. I've served both as an advisor in the past and for a number of years as a cabinet minister. I've always found that if you give clear instructions to civil servants, of course you can have frustrations, and believe me, I've had my frustrations as well. But I've also seen, for example, I think that at the height of the COVID crisis, when all of our theatres were locking down, my civil servants worked relentlessly with me to get that £2 billion cultural recovery fund. Civil servants can deliver, but I do not want to see any diminution in the ability of ministers to expect high standards of their officials, because in the end we're serving the British people and we must continue to do that.
I mean, it's important to say that some of the complaints against Dominic Raab said that he behaved in an intimidating fashion with unreasonably and persistently aggressive conduct. When you've spoken before about a painful woke psychodrama, do you think the reaction to Dominic Raab is an example of the painful woke psychodrama?
Well, I think there are many challenges with woke, and you've seen many speeches from me in the past on that. I think in respect of the civil service, what I have seen is that if you give clear instructions to civil servants, you can expect them to respond to that. And I don't want to see any change in that, because it is essential that we deliver for the British people.
I want to talk about this quite seriously now, because there have been 9 Justice Secretaries since 2015. That's more than one a year. And I think we can just look now at the state of the Crown Court backlog. I mean, the latest figures put the backlog of cases at over 60,000. There's no sign of this coming down. And I guess the concern here is that this is yet another Conservative government distracted by scandal and not getting to grips with the really pressing issues that the country is having to face.
Well, what I would say is I think that, and I don't think anyone disputes this, that Dom Raab did a very effective job as the Justice Secretary, and there's an excellent successor in the form of Alex Chalk, who has many years of legal experience.
There's huge issues.
The context of this, Sophie, I think, as you and all,
the merry-go-round is not helping.
I think, as you and all your viewers will know, is there is a reason for this high level of backlog, which is the inability of the courts to operate as normally during the
That's
COVID
not true, because the backlog started
the
backlog started before the pandemic.
Of course, there were challenges, but it has been made a lot worse by COVID. We are working through it. For example, extending court hours, the continuing digitalisation process for our courts. So work is ongoing on that. There are deep problems which we're seeking to address. I don't think that the change in the person of the Lord Chancellor or Justice Secretary is going to impact that.
I mean, I guess you say that it shouldn't impact it. People will draw their own conclusions, because it does feel that we are effectively spending so much time and energy talking about these ongoing kind of scandals, if you like. The findings from the review into the appointment for the BBC chairman, Richard Sharp, are due imminently. Now, of course, you'll say this is a matter for the BBC, but it's not that simple, is it? Because concerns around the appointment of Richard Sharp are about the fact that he failed to declare his involvement in facilitating a loan to Boris Johnson, who went ahead to recommend him for that job. If there is found to be wrongdoing in that process, should he step down?
Well, Sophie, you won't be surprised for me to say to you that there is this ongoing investigation into the nature of his appointment, and I'm certainly not going to preempt that by saying how Richard Sharp should respond to it. What I will say is that as the Secretary of State responsible for his appointment, I think we as a department ran the appointment process well. We ran it transparently, and I have every confidence that the inquiry will uphold that process as being the right one.
It wasn't that transparent, was it? Because he didn't declare the loan. He's admitted himself and have had to apologise for it. Also, concerns about the recruitment process were raised before. When you were Culture Secretary, as you say, in October 2020, there was a letter from the former BBC chairman, Sir David Clementi, to you, who said, "The committee is also concerned about the appointment of my successor as chair. We were concerned about the very strong press reports that the government, even before the job had been advertised, was in discussion with a preferred candidate, including discussion about salary." I mean, you can see how this looks. And I know this wasn't about Richard Sharp itself, but you can see how this looks, right? The government trying to press its own candidates on, people who it agrees politically with. Some would worry that this is them effectively trying to control the BBC. How did you respond to this letter?
Well, as you often do on this show, and I don't blame you, you flash up something on the screen behind me, and unless you want me to pause for about 10 seconds to read it fully.
This is the letter from Sir David Clementi raising concerns about the
if you give me a moment
process.
to finish. This is why there has been an inquiry set up into the conduct of the appointment. I have every confidence that it was a transparent and open process. In terms of this idea that somehow the Conservatives are packing public appointments. Most of the complaints that I found when I was responsible for public appointments several years ago, that it was still the same old merry-go-round of Labour cronies who were managing to get top public appointments. I don't think the facts bear out that somehow Conservatives are skewing the public appointments process. I really don't think that's the case.
OK, so we've got concerns about Dominic Raab, concerns over the BBC, and obviously to really smooth things over, to show that this is a scrupulous government that's above any scandal, Boris Johnson is reportedly about to put his own father into the honours list. I mean, that is astonishing, isn't it?
Well, Sophie, you really wouldn't expect me to comment on the honours process. That's an independent process, which I'm not in any way going to comment on.
That's the whole problem, right?
There is a set process whereby former prime ministers are able to nominate people that they wish to have honours, and then that goes through a proper process.
Even if they're family members?
I cannot say one way or the other on that, so please don't take it one way or the other. There is a proper process for that.
Do you not think it would look a bit odd if the father of a former Prime Minister was given an honour by his son?
Well, Sophie, you're putting forward a hypothetical.
It's not that hypothetical. I'm not just plucking this out of thin air.
I think actually we saw with the investigation into the conduct of Dom Raab, there was an awful lot of speculation that turned out not to be the case in the end. And it's for precisely that reason that I don't respond to speculation.
Understood. OK, well, voters are going to have a chance to make their thoughts clear on all this very soon. There are local elections in England and Northern Ireland in a few weeks. And, of course, you resigned as Conservative Party chair last year in June. I can't believe that wasn't even a year ago, after some bad election results. You said someone must take responsibility. I just want to have a look at the polling over that time, because you can see that the polling is actually now worse for the Conservative Party than it was when you resigned. If it's this bad in the local elections, do you think Greg Hands, the party chairman, should have to resign as well?
Well, first of all, and I really found this when I was party chairman, polls come and go, they go up and down. The key things are the tests of the British people. And there'll be a test of the British people on the May the 4th, on that election day, and let's wait and see what the results are from that. Of course, it's a challenging backdrop. Overall, the Conservatives are still broadly in a mid-term situation. And when we previously fought those seats, we were in a different position. So there is an expectation of about 1,000 or so seats lost. But what I would say is that my experience of working with Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister is he has brought a calmness and a stability and an order to government. He's methodically dealing with problems. And I'm finding that people are responding positively to that. Of course, there are challenges, and of course, there's a way to go. But I feel that we are heading in the right direction, and I hope that the British people will respond to that in those elections. Okay. But which, of course, are also, I should say, on local issues primarily.